The heavy thud of the docking clamps locking onto the VSS Tartarus felt like the closing of a tomb. Princess Iolani stood at the viewport of her royal shuttle, encased in the suffocating weight of black obsidian ceremonial armor. It was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting a distorted, elongated version of her own face, a face too calm for the sentence it was about to uphold. This armor was not for war, but for ritual. It was a cage within a cage. Below, the high-security prison vessel orbited a desolate, pock-marked moon, a forgotten gray marble in a dark sector. This inspection was a formality, a symbolic gesture. It was her last public duty before she was to be handed over, bound by treaty and ironclad tradition, to General Cale Thor. The name tasted like ash. Cale Thor, the butcher of the Cygnus Rift, the ruthless warlord whose ambition was held in check only by this impending union. Her mating, her sacrifice, the prevention of a civil war rested on her ability to smile, to submit, and to join her ancient bloodline with his brutish, upstart power. "Highness, the airlock is sealed," said her chief attendant, a stern Varelian woman named Lyra. "Warden Volos is awaiting your pleasure." Iolani's long, slender tail, a mark of her pure lineage, twitched once beneath the articulated plates of her armor. "My pleasure is not a factor in this, Lyra. Let us proceed." The transition from the shuttle's sterile elegance to the prison's raw functionality was jarring. The air smelled of ozone, recycled chemicals, and a faint, sour undertone of un-Varelian biology. Warden Volos, a tall, thin Varelian with eyes that were too quick and a smile that was too slow, bowed low. "Highness Iolani, your presence honors the Tartarus," he intoned, his voice slick. "The honor is dictated by the crown." "Warden," Iolani said, her voice filtered by the armor's vox emitter, making it sound as cold and metallic as she felt. "Begin the inspection." She walked the corridors of misery. It was a procession. Her 2 royal guards, clad in crimson and gold, marched behind her. Volos paced anxiously at her side, pointing out security features, shield containment protocols, and the impeccable efficiency of his re-education modules. The prisoners they passed were a mix of species: hulking Orions, methane-breathing Kliss, even a few disgraced Varelians. They hissed, or spat, or pressed themselves against the back walls of their energy-shielded cells, desperate to avoid the royal gaze. Iolani felt nothing. She was a statue walking. This was her function: observe, nod, and return to her quarters to prepare for her mating. They were on Deck 5, the maximum security block, when she saw the anomaly. "Warden," she said, stopping. Her voice cut through the hum of the ship. Volos, who had been halfway through a description of the nutrient paste, stopped. "Highness?" She pointed with a gauntleted hand toward a cell offset from the others, its shield emitter glowing a dull, angry red. "That one. It is not on the inspection manifest Lyra provided." The warden's practiced smile faltered, just for a second. "A minor asset, Highness, under specialized interrogation protocols by request of the War Council. It is not fit for your eyes. A biohazard." "You mistake my intentions, Warden," Iolani said, the chill in her voice deepening. "I am not here to be protected. I am here to inspect all assets under my family's dominion. Open it." "Highness, I must protest. The creature is Terran, unstable. Open it, or I will report to the Empress that Warden Volos maintains secrets from the crown." The threat landed like a physical blow. Volos paled. The Varelian aristocracy did not tolerate ambition in its servants. "As you command, Highness." He tapped a code into his wristcom. The red shield sputtered, dissolved into static, and vanished. The stench hit first. Blood, sweat, and infection. A man was chained to the back wall. He was tall, even slumped in his bonds. He was covered in filth and dark, dried blood. A fresh weeping wound stained the rags wrapped around his ribs. He was unmistakably Terran. Humans. What was a human doing this deep in the Varelian Empire? He raised his head slowly, as if the motion caused him great pain. His hair was matted and dark. His face was a map of bruises, but his eyes were not broken. They were a startling shade of blue, and they were bright with a raw, defiant intelligence. He took in the scene, the guards, the fuming warden, and her, the princess in her ridiculous black armor. A slow, painful, and utterly insolent smile cracked his bruised lips. "Well, well," he rasped, his voice rough with disuse. "Did I miss the coronation, or is this just oppress the prisoners' day?" The warden lunged forward, activating a shock baton. "Silence, Terran filth! You will not address the princess." "Easy there, Volos," the man grunted, flinching as he tried to shift his weight. "You'll spoil the tour. So, Your Highness, come to see the zoo animals? I don't do tricks, but I hear the Kliss down the hall can whistle." Ailani stared at him. She had faced down ambassadors from hostile systems and petitioners begging for their lives. She had never encountered this casual mockery. He was bleeding to death, chained to a wall in the darkest part of the galaxy, and he was mocking her. "What is its designation?" she asked, her voice flat. "Commander Jack Reeve, Terran Defense Force." The man answered for himself, before the warden could. "Though my friends call me Jack. You don't look like a friend, and I'm pretty sure I'm listed as cargo on your manifest." He was captured during illegal espionage in the neutral zone. "Highness." Volos spat. "He is kept alive only for the information he holds." Jack laughed, a dry, painful bark that ended in a cough. "Illegal? I was invited. Your peace mission was a trap. You just didn't like the answers I found." "Enough." Ailani turned, the cape of her armor sweeping in a sharp arc. "We are leaving." She walked away, every step precise, but she could feel his eyes on her back. She could feel the heat of that defiant gaze burning through the armor, through her duty, and into the woman beneath. He was unauthorized, he was forgotten, and he was not afraid. Back in her temporary quarters, the armor was finally off. Ailani stood in a simple silk shift, her lavender Varelian skin seeming to glow in the dim light. Her tail, unburdened by the armor, lay coiled on the cool metal floor, but it was not at rest. It twitched, restless, agitated. That man's face was seared into her mind, but it was more than that. He had disturbed something deeper. 3 nights ago, she had woken from a vivid, terrifying dream. It was always the same, a planet burning, a sky cracking open like an egg, and a man, silhouetted against the fire, turning to face her. He had no features, just an overwhelming presence, the feeling of an anchor in a tidal wave, and a voice, a whisper in her mind that was not her own. A man who breaks fate. She had dismissed it, a stress-induced fantasy, her fear of Kale Thor, of her life being sealed. But the prisoner's eyes, they were the eyes of a man who would gladly break fate, if only to spite it. She could not let it go. The inspection was a sham. Her life was a sham. This Terran was the only real thing she had encountered in months. She waited until the second sleep cycle, when the ship was at its quietest. Bypassing the guards at her door was simple. They were her guards, not her jailers. She moved through the darkened corridors, a ghost in silk. She used her own royal command codes to access the detention level. The guards there were on a low-alert rotation, half asleep in their chairs. She bypassed them all. She stood before his cell. The shield was back on, its red hum bathing him in demonic light. He was slumped, and for a moment, she feared he was dead. "Terran," she said, her voice a soft command. He jolted awake, a sharp, agonizing intake of breath. He groaned, then his eyes focused on her. He blinked, as if unsure he was seeing her correctly. The princess, without her armor, without her guards. "Oh, good," he rasped. "The night shift. Look, I already told the other guy. I don't know anything about shipping lanes in the Outer Rim. I'm just a tourist. A very, very unlucky tourist. You are not a tourist. Commander Jack Reeve." She kept her voice low, steady. "You were captured on a peace mission. You said it was a trap." He stared at her, the sarcasm fading, replaced by a weary calculation. "And you're back, without the shiny hat. Why? You are an anomaly. You should have been processed and transferred to a military holding, or executed. Warden Volos is not military intelligence. Why are you still here, rotting in his personal dungeon?" Jack let his head fall back against the wall. Volos thinks I know something his real boss wants to know. He's been trying to extract it, but he's not very good at it. Too eager. He thinks I'm his ticket to a promotion. Information about what? Why does it matter to you, princess? In a few days, you'll be mated to the biggest monster in the galaxy. You'll have everything. Why bother with a dying prisoner? The words hit her, sharp and true. "That wound," she said, deflecting. "It is infected. I can smell it from here. Volos is letting you die." "That's the idea." "Tell me," she insisted, driven by that same compulsion, the echo of the dream. "Tell me what you found, and I may be able to find the medication you need." He studied her for a long, heavy minute. She saw a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not defiance, not sarcasm, a desperate, calculating hope. "You're the princess," he said. "You're marrying Kale Thor." "That is my duty," she said, the words tasting like poison. "Duty. Right." He took a ragged breath. "Well, your duty is to a man who is building his own army, a separatist fleet. That's what I found. That's what I was trying to warn your empress about when I got caught." Iolani's blood ran cold. "Lies. Kale Thor is the strong arm of the Varelian Empire. He protects us." "He protects himself," Jack shot back, his voice gaining a sudden fierce strength. "He's been raiding neutral worlds for tech, stealing resources, recruiting mercenary clans. He's not building that fleet to serve your mother. He's building it to replace her. And marrying you. Princess. That's the final piece. That's the key. It gives his coup the one thing he doesn't have. Legitimacy. The royal bloodline. This was high treason. This was madness. It was also in the darkest part of her heart, horribly plausible. Kale Thor's ambition was a fire that consumed everything it touched. "You are lying," she whispered. "You are lying to save your own life." "I don't have a life to save, princess," he said, slumping again, the burst of energy gone. "I'm just running out the clock. But I'd rather not die knowing I let that psycho marry into the keys to the kingdom. He didn't trap me to stop me from talking. He trapped me to find out who else knew." Before she could process this, before she could even breathe, a sound echoed from down the corridor. A soft, heavy thud, the unmistakable sound of a body hitting the floor, then another. The high-pitched whine of the ship's energy grid faltered. "What was that?" Iolani whispered. Jack's eyes were suddenly terrifyingly alert. "That," he said, "was a silenced plasma bolt. Get out of here, now!" The alarms blared, a screaming klaxon that pounded in her skull. Red lights bathed the corridor. "Security breach," a synthesized voice announced. "Deck 5, aft section, containment failure." The bulkhead behind Iolani hissed, not with a security seal but with a cutting torch. "They're not trying to get in," Jack said, pulling at his chains. "They're already in. They're coming for you. For me? Or me. Doesn't really matter. Run!" But the bulkhead behind her was melting, and the one at the far end of the corridor slid open. Two figures in black matte armor, bearing no insignia, raised plasma rifles. Iolani froze. A princess. A symbol. She was not a soldier. She had never been in a fight in her life. They fired. Two bolts of blinding blue-white energy streaked directly at her. "Get down!" Jack roared. With a scream that was pure primal rage, he ripped his left arm from its energy cuff. The sound of tearing flesh and sizzling skin was sickening. He threw his entire body weight, chains and all, against the inside of his cell's energy shield, just as the plasma bolt struck it from the outside. It was impossible physics. The shield was designed to repel force from within. The massive kinetic impact from Jack, combined with the two high-energy plasma bolts from the assassins, overloaded the emitter. The shield did not just fail. It exploded. It blew outward in a deafening shower of sparks and shrapnel. The concussive blast threw Iolani off her feet, slamming her against the opposite bulkhead. The two assassins were thrown backward, momentarily blinded, their rifles clattering to the deck. Jack was free. He stumbled out of the ruined cell. A man possessed. His left arm was a mangled ruin. His rib wound was gushing blood. He was a nightmare. But he was a professional. He didn't run. He attacked. He grabbed a fallen guard's shock baton from the floor and was on the first assassin before the man could clear his visor. It was brutal and efficient, a strike to the knee, the elbow, and a final, crushing blow to the throat. The second assassin had recovered. Bringing his rifle up, he fired. The bolt seared the air where Jack's head had been a millisecond before. Iolani, her ears ringing, scrambled for the first assassin's fallen rifle, but her hands fumbled on the alien trigger. Jack didn't hesitate. He dove, rolling under the rifle's arc, and drove the shock baton upward into the junction of the assassin's neck and helmet. The man went rigid, convulsed, and collapsed. Silence. The alarms were still screaming, but the immediate threat was gone. Jack stood panting, swaying on his feet. He was covered in his own blood and the blood of the man he'd just killed. He looked at Iolani, who was still huddled against the wall, clutching a rifle she didn't know how to use. "Well," he coughed, a spray of red misting the air. "This is a mess." He tried to take a step, but his legs gave out. He slumped against the bulkhead, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, the bloody baton clattering from his grasp. Iolani was shaking, her entire body trembling with a violence that terrified her. They tried to kill me." Jack looked up, his eyes hazy with pain. "No. They were professionals. They were here for me. Volos must have panicked. Or his boss did. You were just collateral damage." "No," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. She saw it now. The angle of the shots. They were not aiming at the cell. They were aiming at her. This was an assassination. But why? She pushed herself to her feet. Her legs felt weak. He had saved her life. This dying, sarcastic, defiant Terran. The man from her dream. A man who breaks fate. He hadn't just broken it. He had shattered it. She moved toward him, driven by an instinct she could not name. Her mind was a fog of adrenaline and terror. "Your Highness," he slurred, trying to mock her. But the effort was too much. She knelt in front of him, in the blood and the filth. She reached out, her slender, unarmored fingers pressed against his chest. near the gash in his ribs. She was not a medic. She did not know what she was doing, or she was just checking if he was real, or checking if the man who had just saved her was still alive. The moment her skin touched his, a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up her arm. It was not a spark. It was a current, a fire. It flashed up her arm, bypassed her mind, and went straight to the base of her spine. Her body reacted. It was ancient, primal. Her species, the Varelians, for all their civilized posturing and political marriages, were animals. Their bloodline was old, and it recognized this, the mating marker, the biological imperative. Jack gasped, his eyes flying wide open, locking on hers. He felt it too, a sudden, inexplicable warmth, a connection, a claim. Ayalani made a sound, a small, choked gasp. She could not control it. Her long lavender tail, which had been coiled at her feet in stress, whipped out. It moved with a mind of its own, an ancient, possessive will. It slithered across the cold metal deck, over Jack's worn boot, and coiled, once, twice, 3 times, tight and possessive, around his lower leg. The universe snapped into silence. The alarms, the blood, the pain, it all faded. There was only the heat thrumming from his skin to hers. A circuit completed, a new sound, boots pounding on the deck, Warden Volos, and 2 of her crimson and gold royal guards skidded around the corner. They saw the carnage, the 2 dead assassins, the princess kneeling, the prisoner bleeding out, and the tail. The warden froze, his face a mask of pure terror. One of the royal guards, an old veteran with a scarred face, went pale. His voice was a choked, horrified whisper. "Gods of Varel, he's been claimed." Ayalani heard the words as if from a great distance. She looked down, her tail, her royal pureblood tail. It was wrapped around the leg of a filthy, dying alien commoner. Her body was thrumming with a heat she had never known. The heat of possession, the heat of choice. She was horrified. This was her ruin. This was the end of the peace treaty. This was a civil war. She was mesmerized. The man's eyes were locked on hers. He wasn't sarcastic now. He wasn't defiant. He was just watching her, a strange, shared shock passing between them. Her body, the ancient, stupid, truthful part of her, had chosen. It had chosen this. It had chosen him, her mind, her duty, her entire life. They were just passengers. The chaos was instantaneous. The old guard's cry, "He's been claimed," acted as a detonator. Warden Volos shrieked, a high, thin sound of a man watching his career evaporate. The royal guards, trained for protocol and ceremony, were paralyzed by biological blasphemy. Ayalani was still kneeling, her tail coiled possessively around Terran's leg. The connection was a physical wire, thrumming with a heat that was flooding her senses. She felt the man's exhaustion, his pain, and beneath it, a stunned, weary amusement. "Highness!" One of her guards, Tayen, finally lunged forward. He did not touch her. He did not dare. "Release him!" "I cannot," she whispered. It was the truth. Her muscles were not responding to her. They were responding to him. The guard, seeing her distress, grabbed her by the shoulders and hauled her back. The movement was tearing. Her tail unwrapped, a violent, agonizing disconnection that left her skin feeling scalded. The man, Jack, slumped forward, unconscious. The link severed. Ayalani was dragged from the corridor, her mind screaming. They took her back to her quarters, and this time, the heavy door hissed shut with the ominous finality of a prison. Her ceremonial armor lay in pieces where she had left it, looking like the shed skin of a creature she no longer was. Her chief attendant, Lyra, was waiting. With her were 2 men Ayalani had not seen since leaving the capital, 2 elders of the Empress's council, their faces carved from granite and disapproval. You will deny it, Lyra said. There was no sympathy in her voice. It was a flat, cold command. I cannot deny what you saw, Ailani said, her voice trembling. She rubbed her hand, the one that had touched him, feeling a phantom heat. What we saw was a violation, Lyra snapped. A desperate, dying alien who used psionic manipulation to force a biological reaction. He is Terran. They are known for their psychic volatility. He assaulted you, Highness. It did not feel like an assault, Ailani said, her gaze distant. One of the council elders stepped forward. What you feel is irrelevant, Highness. What is the law, the rights of blood. Once the claim is witnessed, the Kavath has begun, the bond. It cannot be undone, the second elder said, his voice a low rumble. To sever the bond, once it has taken root, means death for the weaker partner, and madness for the stronger. The empty madness. It is forbidden. This was the trap, the ancient biological imperative of her people, designed to ensure loyalty, had just doomed her. Then what do I do? Ailani pleaded, looking at Lyra. You will lie, Lyra said, her eyes like ice. We will claim the Terran attacked you. We will say he triggered a false response, which we have already neutralized. We will cleanse the prisoner, retrieve whatever data he holds on this supposed separatist fleet, and then we will execute him for his violation. Quietly. Execute him? Ailani's stomach turned to water. His life is forfeit, yours is not. Lyra paced, her fury barely contained. General Kael'thor's armada arrives in 8 hours. 8 hours! You will be on that shuttle. You will greet your intended audience, and you will proceed with the mating ceremony as if this impurity never occurred. Is that understood? Ailani looked at the three faces. Duty, law, politics. There was no room for her. There was only the function of the princess. She nodded, a slow, numb gesture of defeat. They left her. The door was sealed. She was a prisoner now, in a way she had never been before. For 3 hours she sat. She tried to meditate, to find the cold, dutiful center she had always relied upon. But there was no cold. There was only a persistent, nagging warmth, a new, humming frequency in her blood. She felt incomplete. She felt the absence of the man in the medbay, and she felt the lie. It was not a psionic trick. It was not an assault. It was recognition. Her body, her very blood, had recognized a strength, a compatibility that her mind could not comprehend. She had to see him. She had to know. Bypassing the guard on her door was harder this time, but she was desperate. She used a service duct, a passage she only knew about from studying the ship's schematics during the dull journey. She moved through the ship's metal guts, her silk shift catching on wires, her bare feet silent on the grates. She found him in a small secondary med bay, not the main one. He was isolated. He was strapped to a biobed, his mangled arm now held in a stabilizing field. His rib wound had been cleaned and sealed with surgical mesh. He was clean, pale, and looked utterly human. A single medic was monitoring his vitals, not Varelian, a Zelopian, a tall, reed-thin being with skin like polished wood and large, empathetic, liquid black eyes. The Zelopian looked up as Ailani emerged from the shadows. He did not look surprised. He only bowed his head. Highness, I am Ilara. I was told you were unwell. The prisoner, Ailani said, ignoring the introduction. He is alive. His vitality is astonishing, Ilara said, its voice like the chiming of glass. He should be dead. His system is flooded with infection. His arm is shattered, but he fights. Or perhaps something is fighting for him. Ilara looked pointedly at her. The man's eyes flickered open. He saw her. He was groggy from the pain medication, but the defiant spark was still there. "Oh, good," he rasped. "You're back. Did I pass the audition?" His eyes flicked down to the bio bed. "Do I at least get a bed now?" She stepped closer. She was trembling. She needed him to be the monster Lyra had described. "What did you do to me, Terran?" Jack tried to laugh, but it turned into a grimace. "Me? I was the one chained to a wall. You're the one who, I don't know, adopted me? Whatever that tail thing was, that was all you, Princess." "It was not a choice," she hissed, the words stinging her own ears. "It never is it?" he murmured, his eyes heavy. She was 2 feet from the bed. Her tail, which had been pressed flat against her legs in fear, suddenly moved. It slid from beneath her shift, a pale lavender serpent, and swept across the floor. It did not touch him. It could not reach him. So it wrapped, twice, around the metal leg of the bio bed he was lying in. A jolt went through her, stronger this time, a wave of profound dizziness, and a memory. The sky, a piercing, impossible blue, a road of black stone, the smell of pine and hot dust, a woman's laughter, rich and warm, a hand, a woman's hand, slipping into his. Ailani stumbled, her hand flying to her head. "The sky," she whispered. "It's so blue." Jack went rigid on the bed, his eyes wide, the medical monitors beside him screaming in alarm. He groaned, a deep, agonizing sound. Get out of my head." "I see a woman," Ailani said, tears welling in her eyes, though she did not know why. "She's laughing." "My wife," Jack choked out, his face pale with shock and a violation far deeper than any psionic trick. That's Earth. That's my home. How are you doing this?" "It is the Kavath," Ilara said, its voice soft with awe and terror. "The bond. It is merging you, sharing your thoughts, your memories." The Zelopian medic turned to Ailani, its black eyes filled with a sudden, terrible pity. "They will kill him, Highness. You know this. Lyra has already ordered the poison." "No," Ailani said. "They will question him. They will kill him," Ilara insisted. "And General Kael'thor, he is a man of pride. He will not accept a tainted mate. He will kill you, Princess, bond or no bond. He will call it an honor cleansing, and your mother will sanction it to prevent the civil war." Ilara's logic was a blade, and it cut away all of Ailani's remaining illusions. She was dead. Whether she stayed or ran, she was dead. "There is no choice," Ailani whispered, sinking onto a stool. "There is always a choice," Ilara said. "It is just that the price is high. I have a supply freighter in Hangar Bay 7, a small, ugly ship. I use it to transport medical supplies from the neutral zones. It is scheduled to leave in 1 hour, just before the General's fleet is expected to arrive and lock down the system." Ailani stared at the medic. "Would you help me?" "I am a healer, Highness. I am Zelopian. We do not believe in cages. I can get you to the hangar bay. I can get him onto the ship. But after that, you are flying into the dark." 1 hour? Ilara moved with quiet efficiency. Jack was loaded onto a hovering gurney, his body covered by a thermal sheet. Ailani was given a simple gray medic's robe to cover her silk shift. She looked less like a princess than a refugee. They moved through the service corridors, the ship's deep hum a countdown timer. Ailani's mind was a storm. She could feel Jack, a dull, throbbing presence at the back of her mind. It was a shared frequency. She felt his pain, a constant grinding ache in her own ribs, in her own left arm. He, in turn, felt her fear, a cold, spiking thing that made him shiver under the blanket. Hangar Bay 7 was small, dark, and smelled of ozone. The ship was exactly as Ilara had described. Ugly, a blocky gray freighter named the Stray Current. The ramp was down. They were halfway across the hangar floor when a different alarm blared. Not a security breach, a proximity alert. Proximity alert, the ship's synthesized voice announced. The Varelian war fleet has entered the sector. Designate Iron Hand. General Kale Thor. He is early. He knows, Ailani breathed, her blood turning to ice. No. He is arrogant, Ilara said. Move, quickly. As if summoned, the hangar door hissed open. Lyra stood there, flanked by 4 royal guards in crimson armor. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Highness, Lyra said, her voice dripping with contempt. You are a fool. Lyra, please, Ailani begged. Step away from the Terran filth. You will board General Kale Thor's ship, and you will beg him for the mercy of a quick death. Lyra raised her plasma sidearm. Ilara shoved Ailani toward the ramp. Go! The engines are primed. The nav charts are loaded for the neutral zone. Ilara turned, drawing a medical laser. It was a cutting tool, not a weapon, but it was a threat. You will not harm my patient, Commandant. Lyra did not even blink. She fired. The blue plasma bolt struck Ilara in the chest. The Xylopian healer disintegrated in a flash of bright light and ash. Ailani screamed. It was a sound she had never made before, a sound of pure, primal rage. The grief was so sudden, so absolute, it was a physical blow. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She grabbed the controls for the gurney and shoved it, hard, up the ramp. Jack, jolted awake by the shot, grabbed a bulkhead to pull himself inside. The guards opened fire. Plasma bolts seared the air, striking the ramp, the hull. Ailani scrambled into the cockpit. It was small, built for 2. She threw herself into the pilot's seat. Jack was already in the co-pilot's, fumbling with the restraint harness, his face pale and slick with sweat. Lyra and her guards were advancing, firing as they came. We can't take off, Jack grunted. None, they'll shoot us out of the sky before we clear the bay. They won't have the chance, Ailani said. Her eyes had fallen on a thick, articulated conduit running along the ceiling of the hangar. A primary fuel line. She fired the ship's engines. The stray current roared to life. She saw Lyra's eyes widen in the viewport. Forgive me. Ilara, Ailani whispered. She jammed her hand down on the controls for the ship's forward-facing maneuvering thrusters, angling them up. Then she hit the ignition. It was not a weapon, but the burst of raw engine thrust, fired at close range, was enough. The superheated plasma lanced up and struck the fuel line. The conduit ruptured. Hold on, she yelled. She slammed the main throttle forward. The stray current shot out of the hangar bay. A gray bullet fired into the void. Behind them, the ruptured fuel line ignited. The entire hangar bay and the aft section of the Tartarus exploded in a massive, silent, fiery bloom. Ailani's last glimpse of the prison ship was of Kale Thor's flagship, the menacing, shark-like iron hand, silhouetted against the fire of her own death. She was dead. The bond was sealed. She was free. The stray current was not built for speed, and it was not built for combat. And it was now. Ailani realized, badly damaged. The explosion had ripped away half their port-side shielding. An alarm shrieked, high and insistent. That's one way to file a flight plan. Jack coughed, fighting the restraints. The hyperdrive is damaged, Ailani said, her hands flying over controls she had never seen before. She was fighting the ship, fighting a spin. The navigation it's gone. Just keep us steady, Jack slurred. But she couldn't. The ship was bucking. A memory, not her own, flashed in her mind. A simulation, a Terran fighter, a spin recovery, Jack's hands, on a different set of controls. His knowledge. Her hands moved, firing the thrusters in a counter pattern. The spins stabilized. She looked at him, stunned. He looked back, a shared terror in his eyes. "We're leaking fuel," she said, her voice shaking. "We won't make it to the jump gate. We won't make it out of the system." "Where can we go?" he asked. She looked at the only thing on the short-range scanner, the gray, desolate, pockmarked moon the Tartarus had been orbiting. "Down," she said. "We are going down." It was not a landing. It was a controlled demolition. She aimed the failing ship at a wide, flat plateau. But a crosswind caught them. The landing gear, which Alara had not had time to inspect, sheared off on impact. The stray current slid for 1,000 meters, sparks flying, tearing a trench in the rocky ground before slamming broadside into the wall of a canyon. The universe went silent, then the hiss of failing systems. Iolani was the first one out, pushing open the cracked cockpit door. The air was thin, but breathable. It smelled of sulfur and ammonia. The sky was a bruised, sickly yellow. On the horizon, dark clouds, darker than the sky, were swirling. Jack stumbled out behind her, leaning heavily on the bulkhead. "Okay," he panted. "We're alive. That's the good news." "What is the bad news?" she asked, pulling the thin medic's robe tighter. He pointed to a small, flickering monitor just inside the cockpit. "The atmospheric sensor. The bad news is the air is breathable, which means something." "Breathes it." As if on cue, a howl echoed from the canyon walls. It was a sound that scraped the nerves raw, a wet, clicking shriek. Iolani saw them, shapes, moving in the gloom, skittering on 8 legs, bodies like oily shadows, biohunters, drawn by the crash. "We have to move," Jack said. He had found a plasma rifle in a weapons locker, one of the guards. He checked the charge. "The ship is a beacon. We need shelter. Now." He tried to take a step, and his legs buckled. The infection, the pain, the escape. It was too much. Iolani, the princess who had never raised anything heavier than a ceremonial decree, caught him. She pulled his good arm over her shoulder. She took his weight. "Which way?" she asked, her voice hard. "Away from them," he gasped, pointing toward a narrow fissure in the canyon wall. They ran. It was a stumbling, painful, desperate shuffle. She was dragging a wounded soldier, and he was leaning on a terrified royal. They were a joke, but they were alive. They reached the fissure just as the first of the hunters reached the ship. They scrambled inside, into a narrow, dark cave. They collapsed just as the sky opened. The storm hit. It was not raining. It was a driving, hissing deluge of pale green acid. The sound was a deafening, tearing roar. They were safe, for now. Iolani huddled against the far wall, as far from him as she could get. She was shaking, her body finally succumbing to the adrenaline. She was a fugitive, an outcast. She had killed Lyra. She had killed those guards. She had destroyed her life. And for what? For the man slumped against the opposite wall, shivering violently. "This bond," she said, her voice a low, trembling accusation. "It is a violation. It is a curse. It has taken everything from me." Jack looked up. His face was gray, his teeth were chattering. He was going into shock. "Princess," he chattered, I don't know your laws. But where I come from, when someone saves your life, and you save theirs, that's not a violation." He took a ragged breath. "It's just a start." He was so cold she could feel it, even from across the cave. The bond was a conduit, and his cold was seeping into her. "You're dying," she whispered. "Been doing that all day." He slurred. She knew, with the same certainty that had made her touch him, what the bond was demanding: proximity, heat, life. She crawled across the cave floor. The movement was clumsy, awkward, a princess, on her hands and knees in the dirt. She sat beside him, pulling her thin robe and his thermal blanket around them both. She pulled his head onto her lap. He looked up at her, the sulfur light from the cave entrance playing on his face. His sarcasm was gone. His defiance was gone. He was just Jack, and she was just Iolani. "Your eyes," he whispered, his voice rough. They're like amethysts." "Your sky," she whispered back, a tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. It was so blue. He lifted his good hand, the one that was not mangled, and his fingers, rough and calloused, brushed her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her by choice. It was not a violation. It was a spark. She leaned down. He met her halfway. It was not the kiss of a princess. It was not the kiss of a general's promised mate. It was the kiss of a survivor. It was clumsy. It was tender. It was full of the aching, terrified longing of two people who had lost everything. It tasted of sulfur and blood and the ozone of a shattered energy shield. When they broke apart, the universe was still thrumming. The bond, a living, breathing thing, settled between them, a quiet hum. Her duty was a ghost. Her old life was ash. This man, this connection, this was the only thing that was real. He laid his head on her lap, his shivering already starting to subside. Outside, the acid storm raged. They were alone, hunted, and for the first time in her life. Iolani did not know what would happen next, and she was terrified, and she was, inexplicably, alive. The galaxy did not wait, while Iolani and Jack fought for life in an acid-swept cave. The victor was rewriting the narrative of their escape. General Kael'thor's face, scarred and imposing, filled every view screen from the core worlds to the outer rim. His voice, a synthetic baritone that grated on the nerves, was a hammer of authority. He did not speak of a failed inspection or a political assassination. He spoke of abduction. "Our princess," he boomed, standing on the bridge of the Iron Hand, the wreckage of the Tartarus visible through his command port. "A symbol of our purity and strength has been stolen, abducted by a known Terran operative." Jack's bruised, defiant face from the prison cam footage flashed on the screen. "This human, a spy and a murderer, has psionically corrupted our beloved Iolani, forcing her from her duty and her people. He has faked her death, a coward's ruse, to cover his escape." The bounty was announced, a staggering sum, alive for the princess, for her deprogramming and cleansing, dead for the Terran. The price was so high it drew sharks from every dark corner of the galaxy. Then came the Empress, Iolani's mother, from the capital, her face serene and unreadable, cloaked in the lavender silks of mourning. "My daughter has been taken from me," she declared, her voice breaking just enough to be convincing. "We will pay any price. We will negotiate with any power. We will begin formal diplomatic talks for her immediate rescue." But as the Empress spoke of rescue, her agents, in the deepest, most secure channels, spoke of other things. They spoke of assets. They spoke of activations. Quietly, the funds and codes that supplied the nascent rebellion, the one Jack had tried to warn them about, began to flow. The stray current was a tomb. It took them 2 days to salvage what they needed from the wreck. 2 days of hiding from the biohunters, of living on medical-grade nutrient paste. Jack's arm, the mangled one, was a ruin, The cave's acidic air had cauterized the wound, a mercy that felt like a curse. His ribs were a constant, grinding agony. But the bond was a furnace. Their shared heat, that first night in the cave, had burned away the worst of his infection. He was healing at an unnatural rate. And she, in turn, felt his strength, his stubborn resilience, flowing into her. They found a short-range distress beacon, still functional. Jack spent 6 hours modifying it, his good hand flying over the circuits, his mangled arm held in a sling Iolani had torn from her own robe. "This won't reach your people," he said, his voice raw. "I know," she replied. "My people are the ones hunting us. This will send a coded burst on an old Terran mercenary frequency. It's a long shot. A very, very long shot." He activated the signal, a 3-second pulse. "Now we wait, and hope the hunters don't find this beacon before he does." "He?" "An old friend," Jack said, and would say no more. They waited for 3 days. On the 4th, a shadow passed over the yellow sky. It was not Varelian, it was not sleek or shark-like. It was a chaotic jumble of spheres, engines and cargo containers, a ship that looked like it had been assembled from a junkyard. It landed with a heavy protesting groan a kilometer from the canyon. They walked to it, Jack leaning on Iolani. The cargo ramp opened, and a voice, a cheerful synthesized alto, filled the air. "Reeve, you look like absolute trash, worse than usual, and you've brought a friend, a very pretty, very lavender, very tail-equipped friend. Is this a new hobby, collecting royalty?" "It's good to see you too, Vex," Jack grunted. "Come on up, and try not to bleed on the ramp. I just had it cleaned." Vex was not a person. Vex was the ship, an AI-bound smuggler, illegal in 12 systems, bound to the core of a modified freighter. The cockpit was empty, save for a single glowing blue node on the console. "She's..." "The ship?" Iolani whispered, her hand instinctively tightening on the plasma rifle. It... "Vex is Vex," Jack said, collapsing into the co-pilot's seat. "The best smuggler, the worst gambler, and the only AI I trust. Vex. This is Princess Iolani. Iolani, this is Vex. Get us out of here, now." "You got it, boss," the ship's voice chirped. The engines roared, and the ship, which Vex called the Don't Ask, shot into the sky. "So," Vex said as they hit orbit, "I'm monitoring the Varelian network. You're famous. Abducted by a dangerous human. They've got your face plastered everywhere, Princess. You look very sad and very manipulated. Kale Thor is really selling the role of the grieving fiancé." "Where can you take us?" Iolani asked, her voice tight. "Where do you want to go?" "The capital," Iolani said. At the same time, Jack said, "Vanish." The two of them stared at each other. The glowing blue node on the console pulsed. "Well, this is awkward," Vex said. "Pick a destination, kids, or I'm dropping you at the nearest neutral trade station. Which, by the way, is exactly what I'm doing. You need supplies. You need a new arm. And you," Vex said, her voice turning to Iolani, "need some new clothes. That gray robe and rifle look is a little post-apocalyptic." The station was called The Drift. It was a massive spinning wheel of metal and glass, a haven for criminals, merchants, refugees, and spies. It was neutral, which meant it was owned by no one and loyal only to credits. Vex docked them in a private, high-security bay, one paid for with Jack's old hidden accounts. "Here's the plan," Vex chirped. "I'll get my medical automatic working on a new arm for you. Jack, it'll be functional, not pretty. While that's happening, you two need to blend. You reek of off-world." They stepped out into the station proper. The noise was overwhelming, A dozen languages, the smell of street food, unvarelian spices, oil and sweat. Ailani had never been in a crowd, not a real one. She had only been in processions. She pulled the hood of her new cloak, a rough brown spun thing, tighter. Her tail was coiled around her waist, hidden, a painful, constricting presence. Jack, by contrast, seemed to come alive. He had a new, functional black metal prosthetic arm, its joints still shining. He wore a heavy leather jacket over a worn shirt. He looked like every other mercenary on the station. He looked like he belonged. He passed as a former mercenary. No, she passed as his property. The thought made her skin crawl. They found a room in a hotel deep in the station's core, a place that didn't ask for names, only for payment. The room was small, gray, and smelled of stale air. It was a safe house Vex kept for emergencies. For the first time in days, they were truly alone, and the silence after the crash, the cave, and the don't ask was deafening. Jack was checking the door, welding a small security node to the frame. Ailani stood by the single grime-covered viewport, looking at the chaos of the station. "He will not stop," she said, her voice small. "Kale Thor?" Jack said, not looking up from his work. "No, men like that don't stop. They just get stopped." "Then we must stop him." Jack finally turned. His new metal arm whirred, almost silently, as he clenched his fist. "We, Princess, there is no we. We just escaped with our lives. We are two people on a station full of people who would sell us for a fraction of that bounty. We are not stopping anyone. We are vanishing. Vex can get us new identities, new faces. We can go to the uncharted territories. We can disappear." "Disappear?" she said, turning on him. "You would just run? After what he did, after what he is planning? He is building a separatist fleet. He tried to kill me. He is going to war with my mother. And you want to hide?" "Yes," he shouted, and the sudden volume made her flinch. "That is exactly what I want to do. I have been fighting this war." "Your war? Since before I met you, I was a special operative. I was a soldier. And you know what it got me? A mangled arm, a hole in my ribs, and a death sentence in a Varelian prison. I am done fighting for empires. I am done, period. This is not an empire. This is my home. This is my life. You speak of duty, of what you have lost. This bond, this thing you and I, it has cost me my title, my family, my future. I will not let that sacrifice be for nothing. I will not let a man like Kale Thor win. He has already won," Jack said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. He was stalking the small room now. "He has you branded as a traitor. He has the fleet. He has the propaganda. You are not a princess anymore. Ailani, you are a fugitive. And if you go back to the capital, you will not be a symbol. You will be a corpse. Then I will die as myself, not as a coward hiding in the shadows. You will die for nothing," he roared. The fight was a physical thing in the small room. The bond, which had been a comfort in the cave, was now a torment. She felt his rage, his exhaustion, his deep, bone-weary despair. And he felt her fire, her aristocratic, unbending, infuriating pride. "You do not understand," she said, her voice suddenly breaking. She was trembling. The anger had burned out, leaving only a cold, terrible fear. "You see me as a symbol, a princess, a piece on your board. You do not even see me." She sank onto the edge of the cot, the tears she had refused to shed finally welling. "This whole time, you have been protecting a princess, running with a princess. Do you even know who I am?" He stopped. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by a confusion that mirrored her own. She looked up, her lavender eyes bright with unshed tears. The question was a whisper, a thing of pure, agonizing vulnerability. "Jack," she said, her voice shaking, would you have touched me if I hadn't been a princess?" The question hung in the stale air. It was the only question that mattered. Was this connection a political accident? Or was it real? He stared at her, the cloaked, regal figure from the prison, the terrified, silk-clad girl in the service ducks, the warrior woman who had fired the thrusters. And now this broken, trembling, beautiful woman. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He did not answer with words. His new, cold metal hand cupped the back of her neck. His living hand gripped her waist, pulling her from the cot and against him. It was not a gentle movement. It was a collision. He kissed her. It was not the tender, clumsy kiss from the cave. This was rough and full of need. It was a kiss of anger and fear, and a desperation so profound it stole her breath. It was a drowning man's kiss, and she was not a princess. She was the air he needed. She responded with her own desperation, her hands fisted in his jacket, pulling him closer, as if she could climb inside his skin, as if she could merge them by sheer force of will. The bond, which had been a hum, became a roar. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her tail, free from its binding, uncoiling and wrapping around his leg in a possessive, claiming coil. The contact was electric. It was not love-making. It was a claim. It was an answer. He laid her on the cot, and his hands were everywhere, tearing away the cloak, the rough spun shirt. She, in turn, pulled at his jacket, her fingers tracing the new warm skin where the surgical mesh covered his ribs. Their bodies synced. It was a physical manifestation of the bond. She felt his pleasure as if it were her own. He felt her release as a jolt to his own spine. They moved as one, a frantic, desperate rhythm against the backdrop of the station's hum. There were no words. There was only the heat and the truth and the undeniable, terrifying fact that they were, and always would be, one. The next morning, they woke to the smell of ozone. They were tangled, her head on his chest, her tail coiled loosely around his ankle. For a moment, there was peace. He was warm. He was real. Then the door exploded. It did not just open, it imploded, a shaped charge blowing the security node, the lock, and the frame inward. Jack was moving before the shrapnel had even settled. He rolled off the cot, pulling Iolani with him, shielding her body with his own. He had his plasma rifle in his hand before his feet hit the floor. 3 figures in black armor, Varelian make but bearing no insignia, stormed the room, bounty hunters, or Kael Thor's private guard. It didn't matter. They opened fire. Plasma bolts, a sickening, brilliant blue, filled the small room. The cot they had just been sleeping on vaporized. Jack returned fire. He was a professional. 3 shots, 3 clean hits, 1 in the knee, 1 in the chest, 1 in the visor. He was a dervish, a creature of pure, violent instinct. He used his new metal arm to block a glancing blow, the plasma searing the black finish but not stopping him. But there was a 4th and a 5th, a whole team. They had been betrayed. "Go!" he yelled, shoving her toward the ruined viewport. "Get to Vex!" "I will not leave you!" she screamed, grabbing the rifle from one of the fallen men. A plasma bolt struck Jack square in the chest. His borrowed jacket, not armor, did nothing to stop it. He was thrown backward, slamming against the far wall with a sickening crunch. He collapsed, his plasma rifle skittering across the floor. He was still, a dark, smoking hole in his chest. Iolani screamed. It was not the sound of grief she had made for Alara. It was a sound that had no human, or Varelian, equivalent. It was the sound of the Kavath being severed. The pain was a white-hot knife in her mind. Her other half was gone. The remaining 2 soldiers advanced on her, their rifles up. They were not firing. They were moving to take her alive. "The Terran is dead," one of them said, his voice filtered. "The general will be pleased." Ailani was on her knees, the pain of the bond break so intense she could not see. She felt Jack's absence, a cold, empty void where he had been. No, not empty. Faint. So very faint. A flicker. An ember. He was not dead. Not yet. He was dying. And she was a princess. She was a fugitive. And she was his mate. "He is not dead," she whispered. She rose to her feet. The 2 soldiers paused, uncertain. She looked at the man on the left. She focused on his rifle. She focused on the power cell, on the circuits, on the trigger mechanism. She had never known she had this power. It was a latent gift, a thing of her bloodline, a genetic quirk of the royal Varelian line, suppressed for centuries. The ability to speak to technology, a telepathic command over tech, the pain of the bond, the desperation, the rage. It was the key. "Drop it," she commanded. The soldier did not move, but his rifle did. The power cell is overloaded. It exploded in his hands. He screamed as his hands were seared, the rifle clattering to the floor. The second soldier stared, confused. He raised his own rifle. Ailani looked at him. She did not speak. She pushed. She pushed her will into his armor, into the suit's life support, into the power pack. She squeezed. The man's armor locked up. Every joint, every servo froze. The man grunted, trapped inside his own suit, a metal coffin. He toppled over a statue. The bond was screaming. Jack was fading. She ran to him. She fell to her knees, placing her hands on the smoking hole in his chest. "No," she commanded. "You will not. I did not come this far to lose you. I choose you. Live." She poured her own energy into him, the energy of the Kavath, a desperate, primal transference of life. His eyes, which had been closed, snapped open. He took a gasping, ragged breath. "Ailani," he whispered. "We are not vanishing," she said, tears streaming down her face, her voice a raw, hard thing. "We are not running." She pulled him up, his new metal arm and his living one slung over her shoulders. He was a dead weight, but she did not falter. "We are going to fight," she said. "We are going to the capital, and we are going to burn Kael'thor's lies to the ground." They fled the room, leaving the smoking, ruined battleground behind. They were no longer running from something. They were running toward it. The escape from the drift was a blur of noise, fear, and tearing metal. Vex, in a stolen medical waste hauler, was a chaotic but brilliant pilot. They slammed through a disposal chute just as the station's internal security sealed the doors, the hauler's hull groaning in protest. "Sorry for the accommodations," Vex's voice crackled over the hauler's internal speaker, cheerful as ever. "The don't ask is a little too recognizable right now. And you two," the voice added, "are the most wanted pieces of cargo in the galaxy. We've got Kael'thor's bounty hunters behind us and something else in front of us." Ailani was kneeling beside Jack, her hand pressed against the smoking, cauterized hole in his chest. Her power, her choice, had restarted his heart, but he was fading. The bond was a thin, fraying thread, a feedback loop of his agony. "What else?" Ailani demanded, her voice a low growl. "A fleet, dropped out of hyperspace right on top of us, unmarked, but the energy signature is Varelian. They're not Kael'thor's, they're gray, old school. They're locking down the station." A jolt, not from the hauler, but from the void outside. A blue, shimmering field enveloped the small ship. It was not a weapons lock. It was a tractor beam. "Well, kids," Vex chirped, her voice losing its cheer. "Looks like we've found a new dance partner." The hauler was pulled, with a gentle, inexorable force, toward the open hangar bay of a gray, shark-like frigate. The ship was all sharp angles and hidden weapon ports. It was military. But it was not the gaudy, aggressive design of Kael'thor's armada. This was older, deadlier. The hangar bay was pressurized. The ramp of the waste hauler hissed open. Iolani stepped out, her hand on the plasma rifle she had taken, shielding Jack's prone form with her body. Figures in matching gray combat suits stood waiting. They were Varelian. They did not raise their weapons. Instead, two of them, medics with bio-stretchers, rushed forward. "He needs a Class 4 synth lung and a full blood scour," Iolani commanded, her voice raw. The medics did not question her. They began work immediately, their efficiency a stark contrast to the chaos. A new figure stepped from the shadows, helmet under her arm. She was tall, with the same aristocratic build as Iolani. Her lavender skin was pale, her dark hair cut in a severe military crop. Her eyes. Iolani knew those eyes. They were her own, reflected in ancient mirrors. "You've been busy, cousin," the woman said, her voice as clipped and cold as a military order. Iolani's rifle clattered to the deck. "Zireya? But you are dead. A training accident. 10 years ago." "The accident," Zireya said, her eyes hard, "was that I survived. I asked questions. Mother, your empress, did not like questions. But," she added, a flicker of a smile playing on her lips, "she found my survival useful." The frigate was a rebel command ship, one of dozens hidden in the dark sectors. Zireya, Iolani's cousin, long believed dead, was the fleet commander of the Varelian resistance. Jack was stabilized in a medical pod, his body submerged in a shimmering blue-green biogel, the synth lung slowly knitting into his tissue. He would live. Iolani sat in Zireya's briefing room, a cup of hot, bitter liquid in her hands. The tactical display on the wall showed the state of the Empire. It was a network of red and blue. Kael'thor's forces, and their own. "The Empress has been playing a long game," Zireya explained, pacing. She knew the old houses were restless. She knew Kael'thor was their blade. She let them think they were backing her into a corner. "The mating," Iolani whispered, her stomach turning, "was the linchpin," Zireya confirmed. Kael'thor's plan was brilliant, in its own brutish way. He would marry you, securing the bloodline. The old houses would see his power joined with the throne, and then, at his leisure, he would arrange for the Empress to have a tragic, fatal relapse. He would be Emperor Regent. He would control the Empire. And I was just a broodmare, a key. "You were," Zireya said, not unkindly. "Until you weren't. Until you did the one thing no one, not Kael'thor, not the Empress, not even I, could have predicted." Zireya tapped a console. The grainy security footage from the Tartarus filled the screen. The chaos, the blood, and Iolani, kneeling, her tail wrapped around the leg of a dying alien. "You chose," Zireya said, a note of awe in her voice. "You broke the game. You took the most valuable piece on the board, yourself, and you threw it away on a Terran, a human. He is my mate. He is a political bomb cousin," Zireya countered. "By claiming him, you invalidated Kael'thor's claim. You humiliated him, but you also invalidated yourself as an heir. In the eyes of the old houses, you are tainted, corrupted, worthless, which is why Kael'thor's propaganda about you being abducted is so effective. and why he is no longer trying to capture you. His orders are clear. Kill on sight. You are a loose end, a political target. Ailani's hands were shaking. My mother, the Empress, she is negotiating for my rescue. While quietly funding my fleet, Zarea finished, she is a master. She is letting Kael'thor overplay his hand. And you, cousin, have just given her the knife. He is obsessed with finding you. His fleet is scattered, hunting for a ghost. He is vulnerable. Now, we strike. For 3 weeks, Jack healed. The rebel fleet, the Grey Hand, moved through shadow lanes. A ghost armada. Ailani watched her mate, Terran, this soldier, come back to life. The crew was wary of him at first, the Terran taint. But Jack, restless and unable to be idle, began to train. He was a soldier, and this was an army. He ended up in the sparring ring with Zarea's top crew. They were Varelian, trained in the elegant, formal dueling styles of the court. Jack was not. He was human. He was brutal, efficient, and used moves they had never seen. He used leverage, joint locks, and a speed that was all muscle memory. He lost, at first. He was still healing, but then he started to win. Ailani watched him, and for the first time, she saw him not as her savior or her prisoner. She saw him as a man. He joked with the crew, a dry, sarcastic wit that slowly won them over. He helped the engineers with their plasma conduits, his knowledge of Terran tech invaluable. He bonded with them. She saw how human he was, how needed he was, and how much he needed. He was not a prince. He was not a general. He was just a man, fighting for a home that was no longer his, and for a woman who had, by accident, claimed his soul. But the bond, that living, thrumming connection was changing. It was no longer just a shared warmth or a spike of pain. It was a bridge. One night, Ailani was in her quarters, meditating, trying to master the technopathic power she had discovered. She was asleep, and she was dreaming. She was running, in a field. The sky was, it was blue, a piercing, brilliant blue, not the lavender haze of Varelia. The grass was green, she was laughing. She looked down, and her hands were human. She jolted awake, gasping. Her room was dark, but she could still smell it. Pine. And rain. She found Jack in the mess hall, staring into a cup of water. He was shaking. I was on the Tartarus, he whispered, not looking at her. The cell, I could smell the ozone, the blood. I felt trapped. The walls, closing in, and I was waiting for Kael'thor. I was so afraid. He looked up, his eyes wide with a terror that was not his own. Gods, Ailani, that was you. I felt what you felt. The bond was merging, dream merging, emotional bleeding. His memories, her fears. They were becoming hopelessly, terrifyingly tangled. It was 2 nights later. Jack was asleep. Ailani was in the medbay, reviewing his medical charts. She was looking at his brain scans. They were different. The Varelian biogel had not just healed his lung. It had, in tandem with the bond, adapted him. His neural pathways were merging. She stumbled back, horrified. What had she done to him? That night, the deepest bleed occurred. Jack woke up screaming. He was in his quarters. He was not in pain. He was in awe. He found her in the observation lounge, staring at the star map. I saw it, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Saw what? She asked, not turning. A white room. You were a child. Your mother and Lyra? The attendant from the prison ship. Ailani froze. They were talking about you, Jack continued, stepping beside her. About your power, the technopathy. They were afraid of it. Gods. Iolani, they didn't just suppress it. They edited you, genetically. As a child, they put blocks, inhibitors, to make you the perfect heir, to make you docile. Iolani turned her face a mask of pale, cold horror. He had seen it, her deepest, most guarded, most shaming secret. A secret she had not even known was real until he spoke it. All my life, she whispered, her voice trembling. My duty, my honor, myself. It was a lie, a program. Aya, no, he said, reaching for her. Do not touch me, she shrieked, recoiling. I am not real. I am a thing, a construct, made to be used, by my mother, by Kael Thor, by, she couldn't say it, by you. She was in despair. This was the ultimate violation, not Kael Thor's threats. Not the bounty, but this. The theft of her very self. She was a fraud, a genetically edited monster. She ran. He caught her in her quarters. She was standing before a small ceremonial table. On it was a single, obsidian knife. What is that? He asked, his voice low, dangerous. An ancient ritual, she said, her voice dead. The Kavath Sari, the severing. It is forbidden. It causes madness. Then why? Because I am already a liar, she cried, turning on him, her eyes blazing with a desperate, wild light. This bond, it is based on a fraud. I am a fraud. I will not taint you with what I am. I will not let you be bonded to a thing. She was going to sever the bond, to save him. He saw the despair in her eyes, the self-loathing. It was a poison. She picked up the knife. She was not going to cut herself. She was going to cut the ritual focus, a small crystal lattice that represented the bond. Iolani, stop. I choose this, she said, her voice breaking. No. He lunged, his metal hand clamping down on her wrist. The knife clattered to the floor. He pinned her against the bulkhead, his body pressing hers, his eyes inches from hers. Don't, he begged, his voice a raw, broken thing. Don't erase what we made. It's not real, she sobbed. It is the only real thing, he roared, his human hand coming up to cup her face. Listen to me. I don't care what they did to you. I don't care what they programmed. They didn't program you to save me on that ship. They didn't program you to feel my wife's memory and weep for a woman you never knew. They didn't program you to fight me and to love me. He was trembling, his own fear of losing her. This her, raw and exposed. They made a princess, he whispered, his forehead pressing against hers. But you made a warrior. You are real. Iolani, you are the realest thing in my life. He kissed her, a desperate, hungry, affirming kiss. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of life, a kiss that said, I see you. She broke. The sobs were a storm, a hurricane of grief and release. She collapsed against him, her body, her mind, her very soul. Finally giving way. He held her. He held her as she wept for the child she had been, for the woman she had been forced to be. He held her as they vowed without words to fight, together. The mission was set. Zarea had a plan, a small stealth insertion team. They would use the chaos of Kael Thor's scattered fleet to hit the capital, the night before. Iolani stood in the armory. She was not a princess. She was a soldier. She was dressed in the same gray combat suit as Zarea, but she was not Zarea. She dipped her fingers into a pot of metallic crimson paste, battle paint, slowly, deliberately. She drew the lines on her face, not the delicate marks of a royal, but the harsh angular lines of a war bride. the ancient mark of Varelian women who fought beside their chosen mates. She was no longer a princess waiting to be claimed. She was a warrior, ready to claim her own. They boarded the stealth ship, a small, fast, black-as-the-void vessel. Zereya at the helm, Jack is tactical, Iolani at the comms, her mind already reaching, feeling the tech of the ship, soothing its engines, making it a part of her. They were in the shadow of Varelia's third moon when the alarms blared. "How?" Zereya whispered, her face pale. Dropping out of hyperspace, a massive, terrifying fleet, was Kael'thor's armada. At its head, the Iron Hand, Kael'thor's flagship. He knew, Jack said, his hands flying over the console. He was waiting for us. It was a trap. The comm crackled. Kael'thor's face filled the screen. He was not smiling. "My princess," he boomed, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "My traitorous cousin. Did you really think you could run? Did you really think I would not find you? The Empress. She has been dealt with. The capital is mine. And you are at a loose end." The battle began. A swarm of fighters launched from the Iron Hand. A battle in space. A battle they could not possibly win. The descent into the capital of Ethelgard was not a landing. It was a controlled catastrophe. Zereya's stealth ship, the Shadow of Void, had punched a hole through Kael'thor's blockade. But the cost had been the port stabilizers and half the heat shielding. They screamed through the upper atmosphere, a burning meteor of black metal and defiance, aiming for the palace courtyards. Iolani stood strapped into the comm station, her hands flying over the console. She was not praying. She was integrating. Her mind, opened by the trauma of the bond and the revelation of her own genetic modification, was no longer just interfacing with the ship. She was inside it. She felt the friction heat on the hull as a fever in her own skin. She felt the stress on the airframe as a tension in her bones. "Hold together," she whispered to the ship. "Just a little longer." Jack was at the weapons console, his face pale, the sweat standing out on his forehead. His new metal arm was vibrating with the strain of the ship's violent entry. "Zereya," he gritted out. "We are coming in too hot. The palace defense grid is active." "I see it," Zereya replied, her voice icy calm. "Brace for impact." They did not hit the landing pad. They smashed through the outer retaining wall of the Imperial Gardens, plowing a furrow through 300 yards of manicured ornamental hedges and ancient stone statues, before coming to a screeching, smoking halt beneath the shadow of the obsidian tower. The ramp blew open before the dust had settled. "Go!" Zereya commanded, grabbing her rifle. "My crew will hold the courtyard. Iolani, get to the broadcast spire. Jack, you are her shield. If Kael'thor reaches her before she speaks, this war is over before it begins." Iolani unbuckled, her legs shaking. She wore the gray combat suit, but her face was painted with the crimson lines of a war bride. She looked at Jack. He nodded. There were no words left. They ran. The palace was a labyrinth of gold and black stone, echoing with the sounds of a city under siege. Outside, the sky was choked with smoke as Kael'thor's dropships descended like a plague of locusts. His troops were storming the lower gates, clashing with the Imperial Guard who were still loyal, or perhaps just confused. They fought their way to the spire. It was not a stealth mission anymore. It was a gauntlet. Jack was a blur of motion. He moved with a lethal economy, his plasma rifle barking controlled bursts. He dropped 2 of Kael'thor's vanguard in the hallway of ancestors, stepping over their armored bodies without breaking stride. But he was slowing down. Iolani could feel it through the bond. The healing he had undergone was miraculous, but it was not complete. His lungs burned. His metal arm was sluggish. "I am fine," he lied across their mental link. You are dying, she returned, sending him a wave of her own strength. But not today. They reached the broadcast spire, the nerve center of the Varelian Empire. It was a circular room dominated by a massive crystalline array that could transmit to every system, every ship, and every handheld device in the Dominion. The technicians inside cowered as the doors hissed open. They saw the gray-clad warrior with the war paint and the terrifying Terran mercenary beside her. "Out!" Iolani commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of the throne. The technicians fled. "I will hold the door," Jack said, turning to face the corridor. He checked the charge on his rifle. It was low. "Make it count, Princess. Tell them everything." Iolani stepped up to the console. She placed her hands on the interface. She did not type. She pushed. Her mind flooded the system, bypassing encryption keys that were centuries old. She forced the array to awaken. She seized control of the emergency override frequencies. Across the galaxy, screens flickered, on the bridge of the Iron Hand, on the streets of the trade stations, in the humble hab blocks of the outer moons, the image appeared. It was not the pristine silk-draped princess they knew. It was a woman in armor, her face marked with blood-red paint, her eyes blazing with a terrifying violet light. "People of Virelia," she began. Her voice did not tremble. "I am Iolani, and I have been lying." She told them. She spoke of the arrangement with Kael Thor, not as a duty but as a sale. She spoke of the genetic editing, the violation of her own mind as a child to make her the perfect docile puppet for a political alliance. She stripped away the mystique of the royal bloodline and revealed the cold machinery beneath. "They made me to be a key," she said, her voice rising. "A key to unlocking a war that would consume us all. General Kael Thor does not seek peace. He seeks dominion. He betrayed the Empress. He betrayed the fleet. And he intends to betray you." The corridor outside erupted in noise, plasma fire, the heavy rhythmic thud of powered armor boots. Kael Thor was here. "Jack!" she screamed internally. "Keep talking!" he roared back, his voice audible over the gunfire. She looked into the camera, into the eyes of billions. "They told you I was abducted. They told you a human corrupted me. This is the truth." She projected the feeling. She used the psionic potential of her species, amplified by the technology of the Spire, to send a ripple of raw emotion across the network. It was not a thought. It was a feeling, the bond, the kavath. For a second, the galaxy felt what she felt, the absolute, undeniable certainty of her choice, the love that was not political, but elemental. "I was not stolen," she whispered. "I was found." The door to the spire imploded. It was not a breach charge. It was a fist. A massive armored gauntlet punched through the blast steel, ripping the door from its hinges. General Kael Thor stepped through the smoke. He was a giant. His armor was a masterpiece of black durasteel and gold filigree, humming with shield generators. He held a massive energy glaive in one hand. Behind him, his elite Praetorians waited. Jack stood between the general and Iolani. He looked impossibly small. His rifle was empty. He tossed it aside and drew a combat knife, a useless, jagged piece of steel against a walking tank. "So," Kael Thor rumbled, his voice amplified by his helmet. "The pet thinks he can stand before the master." "I'm not a pet," Jack said, settling into a fighting stance, his metal arm whirring as he locked the servos for maximum impact. "And you're just a bully in a fancy suit." Kael Thor laughed. It was a deep, mechanical sound. "I will peel the meat from your bones, Terran, and then I will take what is mine." He lunged. The speed of the general was terrifying. For a man in heavy armor, he moved like a striking viper. The glaive slashed down, a blur of searing yellow energy. Jack dodged, but barely. The energy blade scorched the air where his head had been, singing the leather of his jacket. Jack rolled and came up striking. He drove his metal fist into the knee joint of Kael'thor's armor. It was a blow that would have shattered a bulkhead. Against the general's shielding, it merely flared blue and did nothing. Kael'thor backhanded him. The blow caught Jack in the chest, lifting him off his feet and hurling him across the room. He slammed into the base of the crystal array, the impact cracking the stone floor. Ailani screamed, her hand outstretched, but Kael'thor was already moving. He ignored her. He was focused entirely on the human who had dared to touch his property. "You are nothing," Kael'thor growled, stalking toward Jack. "A biological error. A mistake I am correcting." Jack struggled to his knees. Blood was pouring from his nose and mouth. His human arm hung uselessly at his side, dislocated. His prosthetic arm was sparking. The casing cracked. "Come on," Jack wheezed, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the polished floor. "Is that all you got? My grandmother hits harder than that." Kael'thor roared in fury and brought the glaive down in a killing arc. Jack didn't dodge. He lunged forward. He stepped inside the arc of the weapon, taking the impact of the haft against his shoulder, a bone-breaking collision, but it put him inside Kael'thor's guard. Jack drove his combat knife into the gap between the general's helmet and chest plate. The blade sparked, scraped, and snapped. It did not penetrate. Kael'thor grabbed Jack by the throat with his free hand. He lifted him into the air as if he weighed nothing. Jack kicked, struggled, but the grip was iron. "Pathetic," Kael'thor sneered. He tightened his grip. Ailani felt Jack's air cut off. She felt the panic, the darkness edging into his vision. She felt his heart fluttering. "No!" Ailani did not run to them. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing with a light that was blinding. She did not reach for a weapon. She reached for the general. Or rather, she reached for his suit. Kael'thor's armor was the pinnacle of Varelian technology. It was a fully integrated exoskeleton, driven by neural uplinks and fusion cells. It was a machine, and machines obeyed her. "Drop him!" Ailani commanded. Kael'thor froze. He did not want to freeze. His mind commanded his arm to crush Terran's throat, but his arm did not obey. The servos locked. The hydraulic pistons seized. "What is this?" Kael'thor roared, straining against his own skin. "Witchcraft!" "Technology," Ailani said, her voice echoing with a strange metallic harmonic. She walked toward them, her steps slow and heavy. "You rely on your strength. General, you wrap yourself in steel and power, but you forgot who built that power." She clenched her fist. Kael'thor screamed as his armor began to contract. The suit that protected him became a vice. The internal pressure sensors spiked. The joints ground together, sparks showering from the waist and shoulders. "I said," Ailani said, standing 3 feet from the giant. "Drop him." She slashed her hand downward. The arm holding Jack spasmed and opened. Jack fell to the floor, gasping, clutching his throat. He rolled away, coughing violently. Kael'thor staggered, fighting the suit. "I am the regent. I am the warlord of the Cygnus Rift. You cannot—" "Kneel," Ailani whispered. It was not a request. She drove her will into the suit's gyroscope and leg actuators. She forced the massive, ton-heavy pistons in his legs to retract. The general fought it. He strained until the metal groaned, until the blood vessels in his eyes burst. But he could not fight the physics of his own cage, slowly, agonizingly, with a crash that shook the room. General Kael'thor fell to his knees before her. The camera drone, still hovering, captured it all. The invincible warlord, brought low not by a fleet, but by a woman in war paint. Ailani stood over him. She looked down at the face behind the visor. a face twisted in hate and fear. "I was promised to you," she said, her voice carrying to the ends of the galaxy. "By law, by treaty, by the old ways." She looked at Jack. He was trying to stand, leaning against the console, his face a mask of blood and bruising. He looked broken. He looked beautiful. "But," she continued, turning back to the camera, "I chose him." She turned her back on the general. She walked to Jack. He stumbled toward her, and she caught him. She did not care about the blood. She did not care about the audience. She pulled his head down and kissed him. It was a kiss of fire and iron, blood smeared on her cheek, her hands tangled in his hair. It was a kiss that defied every law of her people. It was primal, possessive, and absolute. The image froze on screens across 1,000 worlds, the war bride princess and the broken Terran prisoner, standing amidst the wreckage of an empire. "Highness!" The voice cut through the moment. The doors to the corridor were filled again. But this time, it was not stormtroopers. It was the Royal Guard, the Crimson Cloaks, and walking through them, serene and untouched by the battle that had raged just outside her sanctuary, was the Empress. Iolani stiffened. She stepped in front of Jack, shielding him again. The Empress stopped 10 paces away. She looked at Kale Thor, kneeling and paralyzed in his own suit. She looked at the shattered door. And finally, she looked at her daughter. "Mother," Iolani said, her voice hard, "if you have come to arrest me, you will have to kill me. I will not yield to him." The Empress looked at the camera drone. She raised her hand. "Cut the feed." The technician, who had crept back in, hesitated, then scrambled to obey. The red light on the drone died. The silence in the room was heavy. "You have made quite a mess." "Iolani," the Empress said. Her tone was unreadable. "I have cleaned one up," Iolani retorted. "He was going to kill you." "I know," the Empress said. She walked over to Kale Thor. She looked down at him with the dispassionate interest one might show a broken appliance. "General, you seem uncomfortable," Kale Thor snarled, unable to speak. The Empress turned back to Iolani. "I negotiated for your rescue. I paid billions in bounties. I mobilized fleets. And yet, here you are, having rescued yourself." "I had help," Iolani said, gripping Jack's hand. The Empress's eyes fell on the bond. She saw the way their fingers interlaced. She saw the faint shimmer of heat that seemed to exist between them. She saw the Kavath. "The Council demands your execution," the Empress said softly. "They say you are tainted, that you have polluted the bloodline." "Then let them come and take me," Iolani said. "However," the Empress continued, raising her voice slightly so the Royal Guard could hear, "the Council also fears power, and you, my daughter, have demonstrated a power we thought lost for 1,000 cycles. You brought a warlord to his knees without striking a blow." The Empress reached up and unclasped the heavy jeweled collar of her office. It landed on the floor with a heavy clatter. "I am tired," the Empress said. "I have held this throne together with lies and whispers for 40 years. I am done with lies." She looked at the guards. "Kale Thor is under arrest for high treason. Take him to the cells. If his suit will not move, drag him." The guards hesitated for only a second before swarming the paralyzed general. The Empress stepped closer to Iolani. She reached out and touched the war paint on her daughter's cheek. "The right of soul bond," the Empress whispered. "It is an old law, older than the treaties. If a ruler is chosen by the Kavath, and that choice is proven in combat, the choice stands. The Empire follows the strength of the bond." She stepped back and bowed. It was a deep, formal bow. Hail, Empress Iolani, she said. Iolani stood stunned. The guards, seeing their former ruler bow, dropped to one knee. The technicians fell to the floor. Mother, Iolani stammered. Remake it, the former empress said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Remake it all, better than I did. Iolani felt a squeeze on her hand. She looked at Jack. He was smiling. It was a weak, lopsided smile, his teeth stained with blood. Well, he wheezed, that went better than expected. Jack, she said, sensing the sudden drop in his energy. The adrenaline was fading. The pain was returning. I think, Jack whispered, his eyes losing focus. I think I need to sit down now. Jack! He didn't sit. He collapsed. His legs simply ceased to exist beneath him. Iolani caught him, but his weight dragged them both to the floor. Medic! She screamed, her voice cracking. Get a medic! He was cold. The heat of the bond was flickering, like a candle in a gale. He looked up at her, his blue eyes dimming. Hey, he whispered. You look good in paint. Stay with me, she commanded, tears cutting tracks through the red stripes on her face. That is an order. Commander, stay with me. He tried to nod, but his head rolled back against her arm. His breathing was shallow, a wet, rattling sound. The cost of the battle, the duel, the torture, and the bond had finally come due. Iolani held him, rocking back and forth on the floor of the broadcast tower, the empress of a galaxy she hadn't wanted, clutching the only thing she needed as the darkness closed in around them. The first sensation was not pain. It was the absence of it, a deep, floating, humming warmth. Jack Reeve had been in medpods before, but this was different. This was not the stark, functional white of a Terran military hospital. This was light. He opened his eyes. He was submerged in a fluid that was the color of a spring twilight, a shimmering pale lavender. He was in a crystalline pod. Through the curved, translucent wall, he saw a room of gold and black obsidian. He remembered Iolani's face, the war paint, the blood. He remembered collapsing. He pushed his hands against the crystal. The fluid began to drain with a soft hiss, leaving him breathing air that smelled of ozone and antiseptic. The pod split open. He was weak, but his skin was not scarred. The gaping, smoking hole in his chest was gone, replaced by new, smooth skin. Even his prosthetic arm had been replaced. The crude metal from the drift gone, a new one of polished obsidian black alloy in its place, seamlessly bonded to his shoulder. He swung his legs over the side, sitting up. The room was silent, except for the soft sound of breathing. He turned. She was there. She was not in her armor. She was not in silks. She was still wearing the gray rebel combat suit, stained with his blood and the grime of the battle. She had fallen asleep in a massive, high-backed chair, her head pillowed on her arm, her tail coiled on the floor beside her. She looked exhausted. She looked small. She was the empress of a galaxy, and she had not left his side. He slid off the pod, his bare feet hitting the cold stone floor. He was wobbly. He took one step, then another. The bond between them, which had flickered like a dying ember, flared to life, a sudden warm jolt. Her eyes snapped open. Jack! His name was not a question. It was a statement, a prayer answered. She was on her feet in an instant, crossing the room, but she did not throw herself at him. She stopped, a foot away, her eyes scanning him, drinking him in, as if to confirm he was real. Hey, he rasped. His voice was rough. You look terrible. A tear cut a clean path through the smeared paint on her cheek. You were dead, she whispered, her voice cracking. For 6 minutes. Your heart has stopped. Yeah, well, He coughs, clearing his throat. I'm stubborn. She finally touched him, her slender fingers tracing the new skin on his chest. The healers said the bond. It was the only thing holding your neural pattern. They healed your body. But you were tethered to me. Good to know, he said, his own hand covering hers, lacing their fingers together. I like my tether. He looked around the room. The opulence was staggering. So, this is the new normal, huh? Bit of an upgrade from the Tartarus. This is the Imperial Medical Wing, she said, her voice regaining a fraction of its strength. She pulled away, just slightly, and he saw a data pad on the chair she had vacated. It was covered in unsigned edicts. You've been busy, he said, a new dawning realization hitting him. It was one thing to hear his mother-in-law abdicate. It was another to see the results. The Empire does not wait, even for grief, Ailani said. She picked up the data pad. Kael Thor is in the lowest prison cell of the Spire. The old houses are in chaos. They are demanding a trial. They are demanding my trial. Let them, Jack said, finding a plain gray robe and pulling it on. We'll testify. I'll testify. They do not want your testimony, Ailani said, a cold fire entering her eyes. They want my blood. They want to prove I am tainted, unfit. And what do you tell them? She turned to him, the Empress of Virelia, the last of her line, the war bride. I tell them to look at the law, the right of soul bond. It is the oldest law. It precedes the council. It precedes the treaties. The bond, proven in combat, is the voice of the gods. And my bond brought a warlord to his knees. She tapped the data pad. A new decree flashed onto the screen. What is that? He asked. The first of my reforms. The end of arranged genetic pairings. Effective immediately. He stared at her. The woman who had been a prisoner of her own destiny, now breaking the chains of a million others. Aya, he said, his voice thick. That will change everything. That is the point, she said. The next 3 weeks were a blur of calculated chaos. Ailani, with Jack now a constant, steady presence at her side, tore down the old structures with a speed that left the galaxy breathless. The council chamber was a battleground. Empress, you cannot be serious. Lord Thyron, a high-ranking member of the old guard, his face the color of sour milk, protested. The genetic pairings are a tradition of 10,000 years. They ensure purity, stability. Ailani sat not on the high throne, but at the head of the long council table, Jack seated at her right hand. He wore a simple, dark Terran-style uniform, a deliberate statement, no silks, no armor. Purity? Ailani's voice was soft, but it cut through the room. My bloodline was kept pure. It resulted in genetic inhibitors that made me a docile puppet. It resulted in a court too weak to stand up to a traitor. Your tradition is not stable, Lord Thyron. It is stagnant. It is a cage. And this Empress will no longer live in a cage. She looked at the assembled council. The Edict of Choice stands. Furthermore, I am granting full provisional diplomatic status to the Terran Republic. The council erupted. A human? On this council? They are barbarians. Look at the one you have brought in here. Jack just smiled, leaning back in his chair, putting his boots up on the ancient polished obsidian table. The council gasped. My bond, Ailani said, silencing them, is with Commander Jack Reeve. He is the first consul of my court, and he is your new ambassador, whether you like it or not. Zerea, Ailani's cousin, the former rebel, now stood as the new head of the Imperial fleet. She wore a crisp gray uniform, and her smirk was identical to Jack's. My fleet, Zareya said, her voice clipping the air, stands with the Empress. The Grey Hand is now the sword of the throne, and our first act will be to enforce these new trade and diplomatic channels with the Terran Republic. Any who disagree can file their complaints with my weapons officer. The old guard, faced with a warrior empress, a barbarian consul, and a rebel fleet, finally, after 10,000 years, fell silent. That night, Jack stood on the balcony of their quarters, looking out over the capital. The air was cool, the lavender sky serene. Ailani came up behind him, sliding her arms around his waist, resting her head against his back. I hate this, he grumbled. What? She asked. Bowing? The endless meetings? No. Well, yes, but the title. First Consul. It sounds like something from an old history file. It is what you are, she said. My first and only counsel. I'm not a politician, I'm a soldier. I don't know how to do this. She turned him around. She looked at his face, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. I know, which is why we are leaving. Leaving? Leaving where? Zareya will have my head if I run out on my first ambassadorial dinner. Zareya can handle it. Ailani smiled. I am the Empress. I am taking a 1-week leave of absence, and I am taking my consul with me. The moon was called Ethel Prime, a small, warm jungle moon in the Empress's private system. It was a nature preserve. No cities, no comms, no technology, save for the shuttle that brought them there and was programmed to leave and return in exactly 7 days. They stepped out onto grass that was a vibrant, iridescent blue. The air smelled of jasmine and rain. Ailani wore a simple tunic. Jack wore cargo pants and a shirt. They had 1 pack with rations, a water purifier, and a fire starter. This, he said, breathing in the air, is more like it. For 2 days, they just walked. They spoke of everything and nothing. They spoke of her childhood, the sterile, cold precision of it. He spoke of the hot, dusty roads of a colony on Mars, the memory of a blue sky he had only seen in pictures. They were just Jack and Ailani, the titles, the war, the galaxy. It all melted away. On the 3rd night, they made camp in a glade, sheltered by massive trees whose vines dripped with bioluminescent fungi, casting a soft, blue-green light. He built a fire, the old-fashioned way. She purified the water. They sat, sharing a ration pack, equals in a way they had never been able to be in the palace. We are symbols, aren't we? She said, looking into the fire. The council, the people, they see us, and they see the new dawn, the human-Varelian bond. It is a heavy burden. I know, Jack said. He tossed a stick into the fire. I hate being a symbol. I just wanted to survive. And then, I just wanted you to survive. He looked at her, the firelight dancing on her lavender skin, the blue glow of the vines in her hair. I did not choose to be this, but I am glad it led me to you. I was born to be a cage, she whispered. And then I was a key, then a weapon, with you. I am just me. He reached out, his metal hand, so often a weapon, now impossibly gentle. He traced the line of her jaw. You are. The intimacy that followed was nothing like the desperate, frantic coupling on the drift. It was not the pained, terrified kiss in the acid-swept cave. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a choice, made by 2 equals who had seen the worst of the universe and the worst of themselves, and had still chosen each other. They made love under the light of the bioluminescent vines, a slow, deep, healing act. It was not a bond being forged in fire. It was a bond being accepted, settled, a quiet, thrumming song that was now the baseline of their lives. In the morning, they lay tangled, her head on his chest, his metal arm draped possessively over her waist. Ailani stretched, a long, feline movement, her tail, which had been resting by her side, idly, affectionately, coiled around his ankle. Jack opened one eye, a grin playing on his lips. His voice was rough with sleep. "You know," he said, "I have been meaning to ask you something." She murmured, half asleep. "Your tail. It wrapped around my leg, on the Tartarus. That was the claiming, the biological imperative, right?" "Yes," she said, her eyes still closed. "The kavath, the beginning." "So," he said, his voice full of mischief, "what happens if your tail wraps around both my legs?" Her eyes shot open. She looked at him, and for the first time since he had met her, she laughed, a real deep, unburdened laugh that echoed through the alien glade. "I suppose, Commander Ambassador," she said, propping herself up on one elbow. "We will just have to find out." They returned to the capital 7 days later, renewed, centered, and for the first time, truly united. They were in Jack's new office, a room he had insisted be stripped of all opulence, leaving only a desk, 2 chairs, and a massive high-resolution star map. Zareya was there, and Vex. The AI's glowing blue node was sitting on the desk. "Okay, kids, the honeymoon was adorable," Vex's voice chirped from the node. "You look less likely to murder each other. That's new. But while you were off-grid, I have been busy, really busy." "What is it, Vex?" Ailani asked, her tone shifting instantly back to that of the Empress. "It's that old signal," Vex said. "The one that got you caught, Jack. The one about Kael'thor's fleet. I told you it was encrypted on deep. Well, I finally cracked the last partition. It was not just a warning." "What do you mean?" Jack said, leaning over the desk. "Kael'thor was not the source of the danger. Jack, he was a symptom, a pawn. The signal you intercepted, it was not a Varelian signal. It was not Kael'thor's." Vex projected a line of code onto the star map. It was complex, ancient, and utterly alien. "I have been decrypting this final layer for a month," Vex continued. "It is not just a warning. It is a mission directive." "Your mission directive, Jack." "I do not understand," Jack said. "My mission was to observe and report." "No," Vex said, her voice grim. "That was your cover. This directive was buried in your subconscious, set to trigger on capture. Your government, or someone posing as your government, sent you to be caught." Ailani's blood ran cold. "What?" "Listen," Vex said. A recording played, a synthesized, cold voice, not Vex's. "Terran operative has been inserted. Trajectory confirmed. The Varelian peace mission is the hook. Kael'thor's paranoia is the trigger. The human presence will agitate the old houses and accelerate the general's timeline. The human element is volatile, but necessary for the first phase. Once the Varelian civil war begins, ensure the Terran homeworld is sanitized. We cannot have 2 variables in the final equation." Silence. Jack stood paralyzed. They set me up," he whispered. "They sent me here to start a fire, and then they were going to sanitize Earth." "Who?" Ailani said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "Who is we?" "That is the billion-credit question. Empress," Vex said. "This signal is old, ancient. It is not Terran. It is not Varelian. It is something else. Someone wanted Kael'thor to rise. Someone wanted to pit our 2 species against each other. And someone, Jack, wanted you eliminated from the board, But you did not get eliminated. You got bonded. You did not start a war. You ended one. You broke their equation. Jack looked at Iolani, the woman he had met in a prison, the woman he had bled for, the woman who was now his empress. They wanted us apart, he said, his voice flat. They wanted my people dead. They failed, Iolani said, stepping up beside him. She looked at the star map, at the vast, dark territories where the signal had originated. She was no longer just a princess. He was no longer just a soldier. This, he said, tapping the map, this is our new mission. To find out who, she said, her mind already racing. And why? He finished. He took her hand. She looked at him, the empress and the ambassador, the warrior and the soldier. She smiled, a slow, fierce smile that lit her eyes. Her tail, in a gesture that was now as natural as breathing, as comfortable as a heartbeat, coiled around his leg. Whatever comes, she whispered. I choose you,